Welcome back to Focus Diaspora. This is your host Patrick Dea, and today in here at Swahili Village, my guests are Kawasi Mcharo Hall and Mr. Omulo Okowa. We're talking about issues of Kenya, and when we left, we were talking about governance and how governance really affects the country. Now, the UNDP had several adjectives for good governance, which includes participatory, which means how people participate in government, consensus-oriented, accountability, transparency, effective and efficient, and then the equitable and inclusion and the following of the rule of law. That are the things that they look as good governance, which means that the larger society must be included. There has to be a priority in efficiency and effectiveness, that things are applied equitably, resources, infrastructure, everything. And so if that is lacking, then you have a country that is going nowhere. That the people down there don't see value in their governance. What do you think, a situation like this could bring, where we have a president that, is being accused, and I'm assuming one of these people can be elected, because they can. They have a good, big following. What does that say about a country like ours?
Well, hopefully we are not going to elect a president who will be questionable, or who will have to face trial right after elections. I think what we have to look at is how far we've come. I think I give kudos to Kenya for the steps they've taken towards good governance. Since the Constitution was promulgated in 2010, in August, up until now, I think we can look at the institutions that are the governance institutions and say that we really are coming a long way. Mm-hmm. I cited the judiciary, which is really showing an example. Mm-hmm. When you look at the Kenya police force, which we are saying should follow suit, the fact that the population, the fact that the citizens are clamoring for change in the Kenya police, a key component of good governance, is positive in itself. And they know very well that they have to change. Mm-hmm. I understand they have a new website. I think they launched it today or yesterday.
Okay.
And so that, and you can report, and that shows that we're going somewhere. And Kenya now has an ombudsman office where people can actually report issues on poor governance, or anywhere they see issues on accountability, mm-hmm. Or transparency where it's been compromised. You actually have a place to go. So we are making headway in having institutions that are going to take care of this. What we cannot afford to do is sleep on the job as citizens or as civil society.
Yes, that is true, and I also agree with you that one thing we have to give Kenyans credit for is the Kenyan people. Mm-hmm. Is a group of people who are very resilient. They came up after 2008 when many people didn't think we could come out of it. But look at it this way. When you looked after the election of 2008, actually 2002, when NAC was elected to the government, to power, the Kenyan people showed that they wanted change in the real sense. For the first time we saw on the streets, Kenyans were arresting the police for taking bribes. Mm-hmm. That shows that whatever we call the corruption or the inequitable distribution of resources, the Kenyan people do not want it. They gave example by arresting the police themselves. What is happening is lack of leadership. It's like Chinua Achebe says in his book, the problem with Nigeria. He says it's not the people, it's not the anything. It's the problem with Nigeria is what? It's leadership. Mm-hmm. And he gives example that Nigerian people are known to be very poor, were thought to be very lazy until Mutala Mohammed came to power. And for the first time when he came to power, the announcement that Mutala was in power alone was enough for civil servants to report to the office for the first time at 8 o'clock. Every civil servant reported at 8 o'clock. Mm-hmm. So that tells us the top is good enough to change everything. That is why Kenyans have to be very sensitive when we are discussing our friends who are standing trial at the ICC. And let's be honest, my prayer is with them. I'm wishing them the best, and I want them to get the fairest and fair trial, which I know they're going to get at the international community. But let us not do something that is going to jeopardize the gains we've gained. And I wish and hope that they could be gentlemen enough, civil enough, to realize the impact of what they're trying to do and just say, let me step aside. They're young people. These gentlemen are young.
They're young people, and they can come back. And one thing that I think that I don't know whether the people that whisper in their ears really have the courage to tell them that, look, Kenya is greater than one individual. Because you're looking at, when this thing happens, you're looking at the business society. How are they going to look at Kenya? Will investors look at Kenya as a stable country where they can entrust their investment? And if not, what does it say about the development of the country? What is the net effect? The net effect is more unemployment. The net effect is erosion of the moral, the soul of the country. The net effect is that you have people who now say that, we can do whatever we want to do. There will be no consequence. What is to prevent a citizen from taking the law into their own hand if somebody at the top is going to be accused and completely ignore that? How will it even affect the judiciary in the implementation of the law?
Well, I think, first of all, assuming the worst,
right?
Assuming we get a president who we just want to close our eyes and never want to talk about, we take pride in the fact that we do not have an all-powerful presidency anymore. And the presidents that we are going to have, the presidency we will have, is a presidency that will be under the rule of law, is a presidency that will be vetted by institutions, is a presidency that will have to perform under the new constitution. So we are no longer looking at a president who can be able to fire people or say things or get away with anything, even assuming the worst, that we get a candidate that we do not want to see. So I do have hope that we are actually going to get to a place of much better governance following 2013. We never should let go putting pressure on institutions to reform, because that is so key. We have to have institutional reform all the time. And even when we're talking about good governance in Kenya, there also has to be this connection with the Kenyans outside of Kenya, because they are part and parcel of good governance in Kenya. They have been pushing for the longest time. This is the diaspora.
So the diaspora should be part of the civil society, pushing for...
Absolutely, yes. But it has to be part of the civil society that pushes for change. And this should not be left, this cannot be left just like that. They have to recognize that.
And with that, I want to introduce the next topic that we're coming to, which is, did any of you know that Kenya is actually ranked 16th as a failed state? And this is according to the Fund for Peace, which focuses on the problem that faces, problems of weak and failing states. When we come back, we're going to discuss that issue. Is Kenya a failed state? What makes of a failed state? And then all these issues that we're talking about, things that make it necessary for this kind of bodies to look at Kenya as a failed state. You're watching Focus Diaspora. This is your host, Patrick Dare, and we are coming to you from Swahili Village. If you're in DC area, come to Swahili Village. We'll be right back.
It is our constitutional right for the government to provide us ways and means for us to vote. We cannot pay to vote.
My question directly to the chairman: what is the biggest challenge that you foresee happening?
Voting is a right, and it's not based on financial means. We do understand there are constraints. There are constraints also for Kenyans within Kenya in terms of voting. But you don't see Kenyans in Kenya saying that we'll pay to make it to the ballot.
akili zangu, nguvu zangu oh.
Welcome back to Focus Diaspora. This is a program that comes to you from the people in the diaspora, and we talk about issues that affect the Kenyans in the diaspora. When we left, we introduced the issue of whether you know that Kenya is rated among the failed states. In fact, we are number 16, right behind Somalia, Ethiopia, Iraq, Afghanistan, and the DRC. This is a rating that looks at several things. First of all, they look at it from the social and economic indicators, and they also look at it from the political and security indicators. And for this, we want to discuss. It's amazing when we think about Kenya as Kenyans, that we are stable. We only had this blimp in our stability in 2007, 2008 with the violence after the election. But when you go down some of the indicators, and I'll just go down some of them, demographic pressures, which is from the population, things like disease, food scarcity, water scarcity. When you look at refugees and IDPs, we still have them, displaced people. We've not shown the capacity to absorb the IDPs. And even economic development, areas in Kenya that are differently developed at different stages. The urban areas, the services that are provided in urban areas versus the rural areas. These are some of the things that, are indicators of a failed state. Did you.
Kenya, a failed state? Garbage. I would say throw that report out of the window. I do not subscribe to any report that looks at countries and decides to use the same criteria, whatever criteria it is, to judge countries across the globe. Countries that have different cultures, different forms of governance, different approaches to life, and categorize them as failed states. Why on earth would so many diasporans be going back to Kenya, where they are looking at their hope, where they're seeing this country as their future hope to settle, when they have had their success over here? Why and Americans don't say this, by the way, Americans, Europeans, when they're given jobs in Kenya, why do they choose to stay there? I mean, I'm asking, failed state, even on the criteria that you have mentioned.
Yeah.
These are criteria that you know very well are not across the board. When we look at Kenya's poverty rate, for example, they say we have 46% of Kenyan population that is living under $1 a day. Mm-hmm. And this $1 a day is also relative, because I can talk of my aunt up in the hills, in the rural areas, who is earning under $1 a day, and she has her own house. She's not paying any mortgage. She doesn't have credit cards. She has a small plot of land where she's planting her cabbage and tomatoes. So at what point do you decide this under $1 a day constitutes failed state?
But that, go ahead.
I was going to say that a little bit disagreement that that is not the term I might use. Failed state is not what I would use. But I think I might say they are struggling states. But again, we cannot be ranked or equated with countries like Somalia. That's a total failed state with no government.
Yes, you can say that Somalia has no government. But when you look at, and I'm not saying that I totally agree with it, but when you look at the indicators that shows a failed state, some of them being discrimination, communal and ethnic violence, we see that. Powerlessness of the people to speak for themselves. When you look at things like the economic decline of the country and the ever gap between the rich and the poor, when you look at those things, doesn't it give you pause?
Could I chip in something? One, I said that I wouldn't use the failed state, but I would use probably a struggling state or another title, whatever they want to call it. I might use that.
Right.
We are not where we want to be. That is given. Kenya are not where we want to be, but we are not even where we should be. Remember the new Asian tigers, the new Asian economic tigers. In the 70s, some of us, Kenya had a better per capita income than most of them, or we are par with them, but they took off much better than us. So definitely, honestly, there are some problems. We can't deny that really there are some problems that need to be addressed. But when you talk about a failed state, you're talking about a collapsed system. We are a system that is struggling. I agree that entirely. That even peace that we've always talked about, to be honest, we've never enjoyed that peace. Because unless you define peace as absence of war, then we've had peace. But one thing you can say is that when you look at what has been happening in Tana River now, should not happen to a country that has had its independence for almost close to 50 years now.
Exactly.
Where people are shot, the government goes there, including the prime minister is there, and all the government machineries are deployed. The next 3 days, another 15 people are killed. That is a scary scenario for a country that has been independent for almost 40 years. But that still, having said all that, I don't think would push us to the level whereby we say we are a failed state. I know they can look at other factors like even our being in diaspora here can be looked as another factor because...
Yeah, exactly. It's actually one of the factors about the brain drain. That people get out of Kenya to go and seek.
Most of them are refugees. They are just economic refugees.
Which is true. But as an indicator, what does that say? If the best, and I wouldn't say the best really, but if a chunk of the community is leaving to go seek, the economic power elsewhere.
We're at a threshold right now. We're at a different place where even the diaspora that has been, the Kenyans that have been flowing into the diaspora have now reached a level where they realize there is something worth investing in Kenya. So we're no longer having the outflow of economic refugees out of Kenya. And I wouldn't even categorize Kenya as a struggling state. I really would say it's a rising state. Because when you look at everything, let me just take an example of a place like my village, my county where I come from. In over 10 years ago, we didn't have electricity in a lot of places. We've got the National Rural Electrification Program that has gone so far as to start giving electricity to people. And I know of people up the mountains, very far from so-called city civilization, that now have electricity. We have water reaching people. We have the internet. I can actually go to the little township, Dusty Township, and get internet. That is a state on the rise. It is not a state that is failing or failed.
But and I agree with you. I mean, right now I can pick up a phone and dial my mother, and she will receive a phone right in her living room where she is, which you could not do some time back.
But the problem with that,
yes, go ahead.
The problem with that is that we are trying to rise. All revolutions have their stages.
Right.
We had the agrarian revolution, then you go to industrial revolution, then you come, I think, to the digital revolution. Looks like we are jumping and we passed the industrial revolution. What happened? We never had the industrial revolution. And that is one of our biggest struggle, that all of us, we understand that probably the only major industry ever built in Kenya was probably built 30 years ago.
Right.
And remember, every year we are producing these young men from colleges, from schools, and there's no employment. And what that says, we are continuing to struggle, and that's why I use this term struggling. And I connect it to what I said at the very beginning, that what we were shown at independence, the role of government, what we were told was the role of government, was to give employment. This is the only society where somebody has no employment. Oh, when is the government going to get us employment? Oh, when is the government going to do us this? As Americans say, sometimes the government might be the real problem. The Kenyans need to make people understand that the government is to create that conducive environment. Then let this international, whatever corporations wants to come, international, local, individual, single businesses, start these businesses and just create the environment. But don't let what happened in Tana River happen. Don't let what is happening in Mombasa with Mombasa Sipwani happen again.
Right.
So if you have those kind of security, that a government is functioning. The key to development of anything else is education and security. If you can provide those things, everything will take off.
But I also want to tie it down to the soul of the country. As we look at all this, I think we need to start educating the community to look at what is the value of Kenya as a society. Because I think this is what really is an ailing, this is the cancer in our society, because we don't look at ourselves as the bigger part of Kenya. We look at ourselves as regions. And therefore you see the politicians fighting for regions and not really fighting for the 10, 20 years down the road from now. And I think that is primarily maybe the reason why these two people don't see the value of standing down and saying, let me see my children grow in a society that values ethics and values the strength of the leadership as responsible and accountable people. I think that's what's happening here.
Yeah.
And very quickly, we're coming down to an end. So very quickly, let's go around and you were about to say something.
I was about to say that you look at that right now, just to tie to what you're saying, they are busy partitioning Kenya.
Right.
If I look at that presidential election, it's purely partitioning Kenya. It looks like every community is busy producing their presidential candidate. With no ideologies, nobody, all those people following those leaders have not looked at those manifestos. Probably they don't even have manifestos, and somebody says this is the best party. A party is formed today, all the tribesmen from that group follow that party without even a party producing manifesto. That is partitioning Kenya, that is the danger, and that's what's bringing us down.
And one thing is, what happens with this coalition? People are friends and suddenly the principles don't seem to be rooted in our thinking.
I think I would say the soul and value of the nation is in the people. It lies in the people. If you remove your focus from the people as the leader, or even you yourself, then you've lost the point. That is where the value lies.
And with that, we come to the end of this program today. Focus Diaspora. For those that may have a chance to view this program, we call upon you as Kenyans to take Kenya as your #1 project. Kenya, we must stand up for the soul of the country. We must stand up for the standards of our leadership. We must stand up for rooting out leaders, or the so-called leaders, who are probably there mostly because of their interest and not the interest of the common good of the community. The common good of the community must be #1. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye for now.
Wimbo ninaimba sio wimbo, ni maombi, nikiomba Mwenyezi Mungu aibariki Kenya yangu, kwa jina la Baba na la Mwana Roho Mtakatifu, amina. Kwa jina la Baba na la Mwana Roho Mtakatifu, amina. Ewe Kenya nchi yangu, ewe Kenya baba yangu, ewe Kenya mama yangu, sitakuacha milele.